Jen works with her audio, it might be best to move directly after we do roll call to the legislative items, because those are the ones that where a vote is actually time sensitive. The only other items we need votes on, I believe, are the minutes and the finance report, which we would do through a consent agenda. But if we don't get that and we're able to, get the official vote next time, nobody will be the worse for that. So, Jen, that would be my suggestion. Although now there she is. Okay. You shifted on the screen. So.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
I'm not wearing a lovely headset for nothing then. Okay. And I'm sorry, Mark, you said go right to the legislative items.
Well, we need to do the intro on
Right.
Zoom, and we need to do a roll call because it is a remote meeting. After that, if it's all right with you, I would suggest moving to the legislative agenda. I see that Norm and Georgia are both on the screen. Keith is on the screen. I'm not sure if I'm hoping that Lizzie and Leo will join us, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think do we have a quorum? Yes, okay. So it being 11:35, I'd like to call to order the MAPC Executive Committee meeting of October 18th, 2023. Remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and that the executive committee meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference, consistent with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. This includes an extension until March 31st, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions of former Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, which suspends the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location, provide public access to the meetings, while limiting the potential for abuse of video conferencing technology, i.e. Zoom bombing. Members of the public may view the proceedings at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. I will now call the roll. Colette O'Clock.
Here.
Karen Canfield.
Here.
A. Cole.
We can't quite hear you, Jen. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. And Mark, I apologize. I'm working off the participants. I don't have an executive committee list.
We could ask Ellen.
Yeah, I'd be glad
to call the roll, please. If
All
that's
right.
okay with you, Jennifer.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Take it away, Ellen.
Great. Colette said here already. Kurt Bellevance. No. Keith Bergman.
Present.
Karen Canfield again is here. Jen Constable.
Here.
Tom Daniel. Not yet. John DePriest.
Here.
Tom Galligani.
Here.
Mo Handel.
Here.
Shagun. Believe not. Jared. No. Tabor.
Here.
Angie Lou.
Here.
Gina Martinez. No. Steve Olenoff. No.
Yeah.
Yes, here. Great. Courtney Rainey. Nope. Fondana Rao. Nope. Claire Ricker.
Here.
Thank you. Sam Seidel.
Here.
Steve Silvera.
Present.
Juan Vega, and Elaine Vanya.
Here.
Great. That is our roll.
Thank you, Ellen. Jen, you're muted.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to move right to the legislative committee report. And I see we have Keith Bergman, chair of my committee.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Madam Vice President. And hello to all. Keith Bergman, Chair of the Legislative Committee. The committee met on September 13th and October 11th, and there are three measures that we are recommending the Executive Committee's approval of, and which are on the agenda. And just before turning it over to staff, I just wanted to thank again our government affairs team for the great work that they're doing. What a busy day today is, just by way of example, with the housing bond bill being released just last week. A bunch of us were testifying in favor of real estate transfer fee for affordable housing, and now here that measure is in a $4 billion bond bill, along with other measures that will move us forward. Lots of things in that bill that look like priorities of this organization. So much luck to us all. And I'll turn it, Mark, who would I turn it over to?
I think it's being turned over to Norm. I'm not 100% sure. It's not Norm or Georgia, because they're the two members of government affairs that are present.
Yes, I'm gonna get started. Leah should be joining in a moment. She is actually at the release of the housing bond bill. So I think she's jumping on as soon as the press conference ends for that event. So it's a busy day in government affairs. But I'm gonna share a bit of information about the first of the three pieces of legislation that our LegCom has recommended for endorsement for today's meeting. The first one being House Bill 1303, an act to ensure the right to install electric vehicle charging stations, which was filed by Representative Sicolo and Representative Owens. This is a piece of legislation that would make it so that condominium associations and apartment buildings cannot prohibit the installation of EV charging stations on those properties if it's being paid for by the owner of the electric vehicle. So at the moment, there have been some instances where people have wanted to adopt electric vehicles and install the charging stations, but the process has been held up. There's some already, the city of Boston has a local right to charge ordinance, and this legislation is based largely on that, on the city piece. There are 11 states at the moment that have right to charge legislation, and we're looking to make Massachusetts the 12th. I will say one thing we want to note is that we are working with Representative Sicolo to update some of the language within the legislation before next week's hearing on this piece of legislation to ensure that it protects renters as well as homeowners, and to ensure some of the broadest scope of equity and ensure that we can support a wide variety of EV adoption at various different income levels throughout the state. And are there any questions about this piece of legislation?
Thank you, Jacob.
I have one in particular, and I don't know if Buzz has ever come across this in his line of work, but from a commercial real estate standpoint, I've had several landlords turn this down, and largely because of the fear of fire. And it turns out that, you know, there's been a number of horrific fires. A lot of them have been in, you know, very crowded areas in New York, and they've been bicycle charging stations. And it turns out that they weren't actually using original equipment. So there's a lot of reasons probably for those fires, but the landlords at this stage really don't care about that. They hear fire and they just say, we don't want it. And I'm thinking that there may be a way to assuage that fear if some of these details of, you know, right to charge, provided you use original manufacturer's equipment, or I don't know, some other means to get around that fear. Because I don't know if that extends to the insurance industry, but certainly my landlords, who are maybe not the wisest group around, they're the ones with the money and they're the ones with the property. So I just think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I will say that the fire piece is not a component that had come up as a concern in our conversations. This would require still everything to be in alignment with other code, something we wanted to check on, for example, was ensuring that this would adhere to ADA requirements and not take away accessibility stations. And that's something that's already part of EV infrastructure regulations. So I think I'm wondering if there's something there that can be worked out, but I'm in our redraft that I think is something we can absolutely.
Well,
I don't know if the code calls for,
I
original
think-
equipment, et cetera. So that's my only thought on it.
I think what we can look into is I believe the condominium associations or landlords do have the right to provide sort of a reasonable process or requirements as part of approval. They can't unreasonably deny, but there can be some rules. And it seems to me that use of original equipment is a pretty standard kind of rule to put in an agreement on something like this. So I think we could certainly look into that with the sponsor. We're lucky. I don't know if you realize this, but we have passing knowledge of the sponsor. And as a result, I'm sure we could have that conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Buzz?
Yeah, well, thank you. And as somebody who has managed a lot of commercial real estate and done a bunch of development and done some regulatory work, I think Tabor's point is well taken. Not so much that, and I think, I think it ought to be in regulations rather than in agreements. What is reasonable is there are a couple of other lawyers on the call today. Reasonable is a wonderful piece of opening to legislation, and whether a condominium association or a landlord or other tenants don't want a charging station, what the reasonable limitations are left to be seen. I don't really see original equipment going in the legislation, but I do see it as a perfectly good thing for regulations. And, and regulations can talk about a fire safety plan and any number of other things. So maybe there ought to be more, Michelle ought to think about more looks at regulations. What I put my hand up for to begin with, however, was I think I asked this at the legislative committee meeting, and I don't remember a response of if a tenant or a tenant exercises his or her right to install one of these, does that person have an opportunity to recoup some of the costs? Because obviously they won't have exclusive use of it, and there's a very high expense, particularly high expense. We shouldn't forget this. It is more than attaching into the panel and putting up an exterior charger. It is probably additional power coming into the building to start with, or where their transformer is. And there's a lot of money there. I don't know whether it ranges from, as I've heard, between $2,000 and $10,000 to do that. And a tenant, I would think, ought to be able to, whoever installs it, ought to be able to recoup their costs or some of their costs over a period of time. And I would suggest that ought to be permitted in the legislation and called for in the regulations. Just a thought, because I think otherwise no residential tenant is going to put it in unless they know they're going to be there for 10 or 15 years, and most leases don't run that long. Thanks.
Thanks, Buzz. John?
Yes, thank you. My question is related, how does this relate to local zoning? Our zoning does not allow parking of vehicles within 5 feet of a residence with first floor windows or within 5 feet of side property lines. And the zoning board gets a number of driveway requests each year. Does this override local zoning, mean the electric car owner is going to read by right, meaning that they don't need to get these permits anymore?
So my understanding is that with this, you'd still be adhering to those local zoning codes. It's within the reasonable request. It's not the condominium association or the landlord that would be denying the request if you're adhering to those other regulations set forth in zoning code.
So it specifically relates to the property and not to the local regulations. Okay.
Yeah, because this parking spots that they're utilizing would have to be owned by designated parking spots for them, as opposed to like street parking or something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Steve?
So Two things. One, I'm going to start with, I'm going to have to abstain from voting on this piece of legislation because from time to time, I represent various developers. I haven't the slightest idea how they feel about this. I'm not here to represent their interest in any event. But so having said that, that's just the easy thing for me to do. But I will say this legislation just concerns me that it could easily fit well within the umbrella of the laws of unintended consequences, that there's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of different apartment buildings and tenants and condo associations and all sorts of things. And I do have some concerns that this is, and I haven't read the legislation. I've only read the summary that was sent to me today. So I don't know far more than I do know, but as many know, that's not going to stop me from talking. But I will say that I just worry that there's a lot going on here. The motives are pure. I understand that, but I just worry the execution of this could create some issues. But in any event, I'm going to be abstaining, but I still think that vote counts for your meeting your quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mo?
Yes, I believe a lot of people in apartment situations, condominium situations, do not currently opt for electrical vehicles. I think because they can't charge anywhere near where they live. I think this opens the door to learning what the issues really are once this goes widespread. I would rather have us learn by using rather than try to anticipate every conceivable unintended consequence, because we'll never be able to figure them all out. And I would like to see this go forward.
Thank you, Mo. Are there any other questions or comments?
I would only note, if I may, Jen, that right to charge language is included in the MetroCommon regional plan. I also think, in all seriousness, because we have a very close working relationship with Michelle and also with Representative Owens, it will be possible for us to have conversations with them about all of these issues and to try and make the most reasonable judgment about the precise text of the legislation. We also recognize that condominium associations or homeowners associations and rental buildings are not exactly the same thing. There are differences that need to be taken into account. And I should say right now, the bill focuses on homeowners associations. We would like to find a way for it to also include landlords and renters, but that would have to be an amendment to the bill, which is an item that we will be discussing with the sponsors. So these are all very good comments and suggestions. I think we can take them into account in our conversations with the sponsors and the committee staff. And at some future point, we could update this committee on how those discussions are going.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So at this time, I will call for a vote on each as we go through them. Is there a motion from the committee to endorse House Bill 1303, an act to ensure the right to install electric vehicle charging stations?
I make
as
a
much-
motion. I'm second.
I didn't see. It was that motion by John and a second by Mo.
Yep.
And I am going to enlist Ellen again for assistance with calling the roll, please.
Of course. Colette.
Aye.
Kurt. Keith Bergman.
Aye.
Karen Canfield.
Aye.
Jen Constable.
Aye.
John DePriest.
Aye.
Tom Galligani.
Aye.
Mo Handel.
Yes.
Tabor.
Aye.
Angie.
Aye.
Steve Olenoff.
Aye.
Claire Ricker.
Yes.
Sam Seidel.
Yes.
Steve Silvera.
Abstain.
Abstain. And Elaine Vanya.
Abstain, I think.
Okay, that motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is Senate Bill 1356, House Bill 2197, an act to protect Massachusetts public health from PFAS, filed by Representative Hogan and Senator Sear. And I will go to Georgia, or I know Lizzie joined as well.
Here, I'll kick us off and then I'm going to pass
Yeah.
it to Norman. Sorry to be late, guys. I am so excited. Again, Leah Robbins, Director of Government Affairs, to be talking about PFAS with you. This is a topic that has been sort of coming in and out of a lot of the different MAPC departments for a couple of years now, with potential implications for our public health teams, for our municipal collaboration, and of course, our environment team with our drinking water supplies of most immediate impact for a lot of our communities. So as I think you guys know, PFAS, Norman will talk a little bit about what PFAS is, why we're concerned about it. But the legislature has really been digging deep into this issue with Leader Pro Tem Hogan and Senator Sear chairing up a commission from the past couple of years that put forward these legislative proposals that are before you today. They have a lot of other organizations behind them, including MMA, which we're always grateful to sort of stand in coalition with a lot of our communities to think about what are the comprehensive ways we can talk about addressing PFAS. And this is sort of one of the first steps, it seems, to help support communities. So I'll turn it over to Norman to walk us through a little bit of the memo that you guys received.
Good morning, everybody. I know I've met some of you, but I've not met all of you yet. Norman Abbott, the new Senior Government Affairs Associate here at MAPC. So for those of you that are maybe less than familiar, PFAS are also known as forever chemicals. They have led to increased liver damage, thyroid disease, obesity, fertility issues, and most notably, I think, cancer. This bill is really a product of a lot of the work that Senator Sear and Speaker Pro Tem Hogan did last year in a report around the dangers of PFAS. This bill in particular touches on many of the recommendations. I think most notable is that it sort of starts to phase out PFAS and turns the tap off there. It basically creates a database of companies that are using PFAS and educates folks within a 10-mile radius of EJ communities about the path to consumption, but also some of the dangers and the risks. I think most notable here, and probably what concerns this group the most in a positive sense, is the creation of a grant fund funded by settlements from the use of various foam, typically used for firefighting, to basically deal with PFAS remediation. That PFAS remediation fund could be used to both do clean water, but also to connect to community water sources like the MWRA. One of the places that it pertains most particularly to local governments is that in order to get funding from this grant fund, boards of health would have to opt into testing of wells with new construction and sale of property. So that is a component. It also touches on some issues around firefighters as well. Basically adds them to the cancer database, but also bars the PFAS infused foam for any training activities. So slowly gets rid of that as well. Unfortunately, turnout gear, which is the gear that firefighters use, there is currently no firefighter gear that is approved that does not contain PFAS. So what this legislation would do is require written notice go at the sale for firefighters to inform them about some of the dangers of PFAS as well. And so that's just a very quick overview on the bill, and I'm happy to take questions that folks may have here.
Great. Thank you, Norm. Are there any questions or comments?
I'll just note we had a unanimous vote from the legislative committee recommending that we bring this bill to this body.
Tabor?
So my particular question is in the 20 parts per trillion, and as the work I've done with the Wastewater Advisory Committee and the MWRA, it's somewhat confusing going nationwide. Different states have different levels of triggers or thresholds. And I know that historically we were higher, the EPA was much higher. But I think actually New Hampshire was considerably lower. And I'm not so sure why 20 was picked, and I'm not much of an expert on this, but I'm thinking that because of lead testing in kids and everything else, it sort of proves that across the board, we should be somewhat unanimous in the safe level or the actionable level. And just because we're dealing with environmental engineers that cross state lines, and customers of mine that own properties in multiple jurisdictions, it just seems like it makes sense to keep it. And I don't know if 20 is the number and everybody else has agreed to that, but I see it listed here. So I just wondered if you could address that.
Yeah, the 20 number was set by Mass DEP in late 2020. I know that there has been some discussion at the federal level, but one of the parts that's included in this bill, and I believe included in Mass DEP's charter, is that, or regulations, is that they will address these levels every 3 years to both sort of see which other PFAS should be included, but also to look at sort of that 20 parts per trillion level as well, as my understanding. So it is something that is under consideration. I know that New Hampshire was sort of one of the first movers there in sort of their PFAS level, and have sort of done some of the work up there up north. At the federal level, it'll be remainder BC, and sort of, I would imagine, who's in power as to sort of what those standards look like down the road, and sort of what those regulations look like at the federal level. If that answers your question, hopefully, Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah.
Buzz?
So first of all, I'm sorry that the real estate industry seems to have dominated the conversation on the committee today. But I just wondered, Norman, if you can elucidate a little bit further the idea of the testing on home sales. I'm asking because I predict that the home builders and the realtors are going to go crazy if this is another test that has to be done every time there's a home sale in the state, both because of the transaction costs and the potential delay. So I'm sort of curious about that. And I'm also a little worried so that's sort of a warning to the legislative people. I support this bill, by the way. I think it's good in many, many ways, and it's time we take action. The other piece is wells. And if you're testing individual wells, not municipal wells, that would seem to have a huge impact if people feel they have to suddenly treat their own water, and you can't really treat your water. And I'm not enthusiastic about not looking where a problem might exist, but I hope to have solutions before you actually look. So any thoughts on this? Every sale has to have a test. Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. I think the way that the legislation is crafted now is that public boards of health would have to opt in. So it's not something that you would be forced to do unless you are trying to get some of that grant funding from the state. I would also note too that in our conversations with Speaker Pro Tem Hogan's office, that they are sort of very open to suggestions. So that is something that we can absolutely bring to them as well, sort of these concerns. There are solutions out there to do some of the PFAS remediation. I think that one of the bigger problems sort of in the longer term is going to be capitalization of that fund, as sort of the numbers are seen, but that doesn't sort of address the issue as a whole, because if these are serious public health risks, we're going to need to find ways to address them anyway. So, I think sort of might as well start now with what we got, and those folks that opt in earlier on are going to, hopefully be able to address some of these issues at the contamination point, is my hope. Hopefully that answers it. Sorry, hopefully that answers your question as well, Buzz.
Thank you. Colette?
So just curious if you've had feedback from sort of statewide firefighters and Board of Health groups to say that, they support this, and this is how they see it operationalized, and any feedback from that group?
Not that I've heard yet. That's Griffin, when he spoke with us, didn't mention any sort of negative pushback that they've heard yet as this has come out. I think some of the bigger issues with the turnout gear that you mentioned, Colette, are actually a federal issue, and sort of the federal oversight body just has not approved of the turnout gear. Hopefully that will be coming. I think that some of the foam use here is somewhat is not as restrictive as it could be. So like, you know, if your house is on fire and the only way to put it out is with that foam, they'll use the foam, and then they just need to report that to Mass DEP. So it doesn't even outlaw sort of the foam in general, it just outlaws it and sort of training purposes.
I just think it would be
I will
helpful
say-
to have their support in this process.
The fire marshal for Mass Department of Fire Services was on the commission that helped come up with the recommendations that underline the bill. An executive office of public safety and security was in it. They had some folks from Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UMass Amherst. So they had a pretty broad swath that helped inform the drafting of the recommendations that then became this bill. So the Firefighters Association itself, I don't know to what extent they've been involved, but I think it's been like more than a year, so I'd have to go back to my notes, but I think they might have testified at one of the hearings. I can double check. That's a good flag, Colette, to see sort of how and where they've weighed in.
They also held, I want to say, a good number of public hearings as they were sort of putting this together. So this was definitely not something that was, you know, sort of thrown together quickly in a back room.
Thank you, Norm and Leah. Actually, I just wanted to ask a question as well in similar vein. Regarding the PFAS Remediation Trust Fund, was there any discussion about having any of those funds be available to municipalities and or fire departments, whether it's for, fresh airway exchange improvements or station improvements to help mitigate some of the effects from the turnout gear? It appears, at least in the summary, that the funds would be focused on groundwater and soil mitigation.
I believe that is the primary focus of that funding. So it is not necessarily for the firefighting facilities.
Okay, and it sounds like there was not discussion or that issue raised.
It was not raised during our previous discussion with Speaker Pro Tem Hogan's office, but it's something that we could absolutely bring to them in our
I think,
conversations.
as most people around the table here know, we have a close relationship with the Fire Chiefs Association of Massachusetts, and we can check in with them. We can check in with the union, obviously, Mass Firefighters, to see what the perspective is. I think that firefighters are very eager to move to a situation where neither the gear nor the foam is going to include PFAS anymore. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. I can't think of anyone who doesn't want that to happen. I'm sure the Speaker Pro Tem wants it to happen, but it is nonetheless true that the primary focus of this legislation is contamination of the water supply. And that does not say there are not other issues regarding firefighting equipment and materials that would be equally worthy of attention. And I think we should find out a little bit more about that. But as a bill on its own that is primarily focused on dealing with the municipal issue of water supply, that's what this legislation is mainly seeking to deal with.
Thank you, Mark. Sagan?
I just have, well, first of all, hello, everybody.
Hi.
I just have it's a point of information. I'm just wondering about the fund. If there was any discussion about what might be expected to be raised by the fund versus, I just don't know, like, what is the actual need? So based on the categories that we want to use the fund for, like, do we know, is it like 100 million that needs to, $100 million in need, but we think this might raise X amount of dollars? I'm just wondering if that ever came up.
I think it would be safe to say that the need is going to outstrip the funding to the fund. And I think one of the things that we discussed with Griffin before this was that they're sort of balancing between sort of doing a grant fund versus a revolving fund, and obviously a revolving fund will be able to treat more, but and it's not going to be as helpful for probably some of the municipalities that can't afford it. So I think they're really sort of more gung-ho about doing a grant fund versus a revolving fund, and hopefully it'll be something that is seen as successful in the legislature, and they'll see the value of sort of further capitalizing that fund through future budgets or sort of future funding sources. But I would say definitely, we don't know yet the specific number, but I would say that the need is going to be higher than the availability, unfortunately.
Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, is there a motion to endorse Senate Bill 1356, House Bill 2197, and act to protect Massachusetts public health from PFAS?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Karen, second. I missed the second.
Tabor.
Tabor, thank you. Ellen, if you could call the roll, please.
Yep, and we've had a few folks join. So Colette,
Aye.
Keith Bergman,
Aye.
Karen Canfield,
Aye.
Jen Constable.
Aye.
I don't think Tom Daniel is in yet. John DePriest,
Aye.
Tom Galligani,
Aye.
Mo Handel,
Aye.
Shagun,
Aye.
Jared,
Just joined.
Sorry, aye.
thank you, Jared.
Uh-huh.
Tabor,
Aye.
Angie,
Aye.
Steve Olenoff,
Aye.
Vandana,
Abstain.
Claire Ricker,
By Ricker, yes.
Sam Seidel,
Yes.
Juan Vega. I skipped Steve Silvera. Sorry, Steve.
That's okay. I'm going to abstain in any event.
Okay. No, and Elaine Vanya.
Abstain.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ellen. That motion passes. Okay, next proposal is Senate Bill 627, House Bill 1158, an act establishing protections and accountability for TNC and DNC workers, consumers, and communities, filed by Senator Edwards and Representative Vargas.
I'm going to pass this one off to Georgia to get us started and talk a little bit about our work with transportation network companies, and then Norman will sort of drill down on some of the specifics of the bill.
So yeah. As you all know, MAPC has been working in the TNC space for a number of years now. Our transportation team has worked on a number of different research projects in this space, most recently looking at the rise of rapid deliveries and the delivery network companies with our App-to-Table report, which came out, I believe, at the beginning of this year. We, in the State House, have been working on legislation to raise the fees for TNC riders, as well as start collecting data on the rapid delivery network companies and understand more how that new emerging technology is impacting our transportation system. So this legislation that Norman's going to get a bit more into is in that similar vein of trying to understand and look at the transportation network companies and engage further with the impact that they're having on our economies and on the transportation sector as a whole. So I'll pass it to Norman.
Thanks, Georgia. So this bill, I think first and foremost, probably the flashiest part is sort of those worker protections, right? It does finally, categorize TNC, which is your Uber, your Lyft, your Curb and your DNC, which are delivery services, your Uber Eats, your DoorDash, those folks as employees of the company. It sets a minimum wage. Folks may have seen there was a Boston Globe article yesterday that said that these folks are actually, a lot of these workers are making less than minimum wage, around $12 an hour. So even if they're on the clock and not accepting work, they would be making Massachusetts minimum wage. If they are transporting a passenger, they'd be making 150% of minimum wage. If they're able to earn more than that, either through surge pricing or through just drop off, pickup, delivery volume, they would make that much. They would make that money. One of the nice things about this is that for the MAPC purposes, is it provides much more data. For those of you that are familiar with the existing data, you basically see a lot of the TNC rides that are starting, within Boston and ending within Boston. This would provide much more detailed information on that front that MAPC, cities and towns, could use through data sharing agreements with DPU. It also provides, as Georgia said, some specific overview of how DNCs should be regulated as well, which is not something that existed previously. It's a little bit of the wild west in Massachusetts on that front right now, and would also work to help reduce some of their, force them to plan to reduce their emissions every 2 years and report out on that. As it pertains to municipalities, you may have seen in this, it would allow municipalities to license individual drivers and set a limit on the number of licenses with good reason. The bill does not say what those good reasons are, as you may have seen with the memo, but something to keep an eye on as well. That I think is the major overview of the bill. Georgia, is there anything I'm missing there that you want to add?
That was great.
The one thing I want to say is that I think many of you may be aware that there are ballot question initiatives on a similar topic, and MAPC does not take a stance on ballot initiatives. This is only to interact with the legislative vehicle that is moving this session, just to make that point clear. So if you have questions with the bill, glad to entertain those.
I guess I would, if I could, Jen, say just a couple of quick things on this bill. There are really two reasons that this bill is relevant from a Metro Common perspective and why we're bringing it before you and brought it before the Legislative Committee. One is that we do a lot of work in the TNC space, which Georgia outlined. And as a result, we feel it's it is yet another possible vehicle to get appropriate fees and, incredibly important, the data collection requirements passed. The other reason is really related to our economic development and workforce elements of Metro Common, where we are very focused on a good, strong living wage for all residents of the Commonwealth, particularly for those residents who might be suffering from lower incomes and poverty over the long term. Obviously, many additional people are joining in this space, and a lot of people feel that there should be appropriate, albeit limited, worker protections and minimum wages that apply in this case. I think many people, I would include myself as one of them, think these folks are employees. They're being called not employees for reasons of convenience. And this it seemed to us, and we met with the sponsors. We also met with representatives of the labor industry, labor movement that has been supporting this. I think we grilled them all pretty hard and think it is a reasonable approach. It is the kind of a thing which is likely to be debated a lot on Beacon Hill, and the final bill may look considerably different than the first bill. I see Karen knowingly shaking her head in agreement. And we would, of course, monitor that. Not everything in the bill is perfect, and many things in the bill probably are a bit too much of a stretch for the legislature to go along. But we think it's the strongest bill that is out there at the moment, that is well drafted, and that has a decent chance of success. So we feel it's important from both a transportation and an equitable economic development perspective that MAPC be on the record in support of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions or comments? Karen?
Hi, thanks. First, general comment. Thank you so much for the legislative team for putting the context of these recommendations against what we have approved for Metro Common. That was very helpful in review, because a couple of them I went, what? And then I got it. So thank you for doing that. I know that Jared slid into the meeting, and I'd be curious if he has any comments on this, but I've been following this for a long time, and I'd have to commend this piece, because it's probably like 6th, 7th generation of trying to, iterate. And I think you're absolutely right. There's still a long way to go, but that, it's a conversation that's been going on long enough that it may actually get some traction. So I'm happy, to throw my support behind it and know that it's just the start of it, but it's really good work.
Thank you, Karen. Jared?
Hi, yeah, thank you, and thanks for the tip, Karen. Yeah, and I mean, I would just echo, I think what staff has already said. Yeah, just getting the information, being able to capture that information, I think is really, really critical. Just the amount of congestion that these TNCs are causing, particularly for the food deliveries, is huge. So I think being able to close this sort of loophole is going to be really going to be really critical. And just, I mean, even some of the information that we've already gotten and that MAPC, I think, has been a part of in terms of, pointing out just how big of a safety issue, that despite making up a significantly smaller percentage of the vehicles, they still, wind up making about, I think, 25 or 30% of the collisions in the metro. So I think, hopefully this will be the first step. I think later on, I think we'll have to sort of talk about what those, what hiking the fees even higher looks like, and how do we start to, how do we start to, spread some of the programs that the city is already looking at, like, delivery bikes and just sort of alternative methods. So we're not overly relying on TNCs, or at least TNCs as vehicles. So, but yeah, definitely support this. Great first step.
Thank you, Jared. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to endorse, Senate Bill 627, House Bill 1158, an act establishing protections and accountability for TNC and DNC workers, consumers, and communities?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mo, second by John. Ellen, if you could call the roll, please.
Colette,
Aye.
Keith Bergman,
Aye.
Karen Canfield,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
John, is Tom Daniel here yet? No.
Don't see.
John DePriest,
Aye.
Tom Galligani,
Aye.
Mo,
Aye.
Shagun,
Abstain.
Jared,
Aye.
Tabor,
All right.
Angie,
Aye.
Steve Olenoff,
Aye.
Bondana,
Abstain.
Claire Ricker,
Yes.
Sam Seidel,
Yes.
Steve Silvera is out, and Elaine Vanya.
Abstain.
You said abstain? Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That motion passes. I'm going to go back to the agenda item number 2, which is approval of minutes from September 20th, 2023. Is there, well, this would be a consent agenda item, both approval of the minutes as well as the treasurer's report. So if there's a motion to move as part item 2, again, approval of the minutes to the consent agenda, I would accept that now.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Bondana.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on now to the treasurer's report, financial statement for July 2023. That be
Jen,
Sam.
before you move on, could I do a quick legislative update just to let folks know? The housing bond was filed this morning. We'll be sending around some summary information as soon as we have it. We have it in our hands. We just have to like touch it up a little bit and pull everything together for you. So we'll get that out. It has many of the priorities that this committee has endorsed. We are really excited about this proposal. It is big, it is bold, to use the governor's words, but it is achievable. I think that's like a direct quote. It is $4 billion in investments in a bond bill, which is the largest I've ever seen, and 29 policy proposals to go alongside it. Again, many of which are in MetroCom and many of which we have individually endorsed around this table, including transfer fee, accessory dwelling units by right, eviction ceiling. I like check on so many of the things we've been working on for many years. So I do just want to like say it's a big celebration that so many of the things we've been looking for have found a home in the governor's proposal, and it's going to be a lot of work to see it come back to her desk again with any of these pieces included. I'm not naive to think it's not going to be a lot of conversations, but we're ready for them on the government affairs team. We're really excited for that. At the same time, we are still waiting for that supplemental budget to move with money for the emergency shelter system, emergency housing system that is supporting many of the migrants and communities. and that overflow. So just to note that that is another space we're continuing to work on. And then the House today is voting on gun legislation, which our Metro Mayors Coalition has been deeply watching. So all of a sudden things are moving again. Lots of bills are having their hearing so that MAPC's voice can be weighing in once we have the endorsement of this group. So just last week, we testified in support of the transfer fee bill and the HERO bill. So I think almost every week we have at least one hearing, usually more. That is like my very quick view. I know we have a lot to cover in this meeting. So if there are other updates from the team, I'm gonna look to see and what we can add more information in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Leah, and for the added enthusiasm. Okay, back to Sam.
Thank you, Jen. And hi, everybody. Sam Seidel, Treasurer. We'll basically do a very, just a quick look at the July 2023 income statement, which you received.
Ellen can share that on the screen, Sam.
All right. Ellen, I'll let you work on that.
Yeah, feel free to get started. It'll just take a
All right. Well, the overview will be fairly brief, partly because it's the start of a new fiscal year. July obviously starts a new fiscal year. So the numbers are all fresh and new. Our vaunted overhead rate is the new rate for the new year. And we'll see that we're actually doing very well on that account that I'm always keeping track of, which is that we want our numbers to get pretty close to our overhead rate. What we ended up submitting to Mass DOT was 123%. That was our proposed overhead rate that was approved by them. And if you look at our numbers, right down at the bottom, the actual overhead rate is 123.7%. So we're looking right on target. I would just point out that if we look at direct labor, that's coming in at about 85% of what we had budgeted. So we're right now in the middle of a sheet in budget versus actual. And we see that that's at 85%. And our total administrative expenses, if we go down a few lines, probably about 6 lines, we'll see that that's also at 85%. And that means that we're running just about par. We're not at 100% of what the budget called for, but it does mean that we're meeting our target of 123%. And then if you go over into the right-hand columns, this is the only time in the year where our year-to-date numbers are exactly the same as our monthly numbers because it is the start of a fiscal year. Anna feels very good about these numbers. She reminded me of where we were a year ago, a year prior to this, as we were coming out of COVID, and there was a lot of sort of fluctuation and the numbers were sort of all over the place. And it feels a much greater sense that these numbers are solid. We're getting more back into a regular, normal pace of events. And the August numbers look good. She hasn't finished all the August numbers yet, but they're looking good as well. Really nothing else that I want to report out of all of this. That concludes the treasurer's report. I will entertain any questions or comments at this point.
The only thing that I would add is that one of the things that has happened to MAPC is we've hired more people to fill vacant positions. The agency has grown a little, not too much, but in the last year, we've hired a lot of people to fill vacant positions, and our ability to, importantly, meet the overhead rate, but more importantly, accomplish our work on behalf of our members is dependent upon having a fully staffed situation. And we have vacancies, but those vacancies are now a lot closer to what you would consider normal turnover than they were a year ago. So that's a very good thing.
Okay, thank you, Sam and Mark. Are there any other questions? I don't believe we're seeing any. If we could stop sharing the screen, that would be, thank you. Okay, seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to move approval of the treasurer's report to the consent agenda?
So moved, Wellesley.
Second.
Motion by Colette, second by Mo.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the executive director's report. Mark?
All I'm going to tell you in the interest of time is that you have the executive director's report. This afternoon, I am going to add one section to it. The clean energy section was inadvertently left out. So I'm going to add that and send you a new copy. I urge you to read it. This new system that we have of asking for really only one or two items from, I think we say 2 to 4 items from each division or department, has transformed what is commonly a 30-page executive director's report into a 10-page executive director's report, which is easier for you to consume, and I guarantee you it is easier for Amanda and me to edit. So I urge you to read it. If you have any questions, let me know or call the relevant department.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to project update. Population, employment, and housing projections for the MAPC region and throughout the Commonwealth. Is Jessie Partridge with us?
Yes. Jessie is here and she's
Hello.
going to make this presentation.
Okay. Oh, turn it
Hi,
over to you,
everyone.
Jessie.
Do I have sharing permissions? Looks like I do. Let me share my screen. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Jessie Partridge Guerrero. I am the interim data services director. Can you all see my slides?
Not yet.
You can't. Okay.
Jessie, I just made you co-host as well, so maybe just try again.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So I'm going to share the results of our latest population, household, and employment projections. We update these projections every 4 years in partnership with MassDOT and the UMass Donahue Institute as part of MassDOT's long-range transportation planning process. This diagram here outlines the workflow of our partnership. So the process starts with UMass Donahue creating population projections by age. And MAPC then takes those population projections and creates household projections as well as labor force projections. We also forecast detailed household characteristics such as the size of the household, whether or not there are children, the age of the householder, et cetera. And then we allocate those using our urban sim model down to the municipal and sub-municipal scale. On the employment side, UMass Donahue generates industry projections and then combines those with the labor force to forecast jobs. We then take those job projections and allocate them down to the local scale as well using our urban sim model. Throughout the process, we partner with our sister RPAs around the state. We met over the last year and a half or so monthly with the RPAs and our partners so that the RPAs could be apprised and comment on our methods as well as review data drafts. When we had municipal drafts ready, we also shared those with our municipal partners within MAPC for their review and comment. And I just want to acknowledge my colleagues, Brandon Stanaway, Connor Gately, and my former colleague, Tim Reardon, for all their work on these projections. So before I dive into the results, I just want to share some context that this was a really challenging time to project the future. These were the first projections we've done since the COVID-19 pandemic sort of turned our world upside down. And that's had a lot of impacts that make it challenging to predict the future. Remote work has become normalized, and yet we still don't fully know the long-term impact of remote work and how it will impact people's choices of where to live and who to work for. We've seen rapid changes in our economy with e-commerce and rapid delivery, automation, and more. And of course, our housing shortage has meant that housing prices are unattainable for many families, makes it hard for people to choose to move here, and it makes it hard for people to form new households. So younger adults are living more with their parents. roommates are choosing to stay together rather than forming their own new households with a partner or in a studio. And that's really suppressed our household formation rate in the region and the state. And then on top of all of these trends, the foundational data that we use to create these projections is decennial census data. The 2020 census was conducted in April of 2020, just as lockdown was happening. And there was a long delay in actually getting the detailed demographic data from the census. So we were able to include the redistricting data with population, 2020 population in the population forecasts, but we weren't able to use the more detailed demographic data that we normally would. So this outlines sort of the components of the population projections that UMass Donahue produces. They look at sort of recent trends in births, deaths, and migration to understand what the population might do in the future. As you can see here in green, the long-term birth rate has been declining in Massachusetts and in the nation. Deaths have been increasing in the last 5 to 10 years, largely due to the aging of the baby boomer generation. And then in migration, sort of movement into and out of the state, we see in this yellow line here, that's international migration. You can see a sharp decline in international migration starting in 2017 with our previous presidential administration. And you can see sort of domestic migration over a longer time period has been declining. These trends in the last year have also been, changing rapidly. But overall, in net migration, you can see a net decline for the first time in a long time over the last few years. So these trends combined lead to the population projections that UMDI produced, which show a general moderation of growth in the state out to the year 2050. This chart shows in the dark blue line the population that we know from our decennial censuses back to 1980. You can see this sort of rapid increase in population growth from 2010 to 2020. And that population growth actually surpassed what UMDI had predicted in the last couple of rounds of projections, and those are the light blue dotted lines. In the orange dotted lines, you can see what UMDI has projected in this round of projections, which is continued growth statewide, but sort of plateauing around 2040. If we then look at the regional scale, we actually see a mix of growth and decline in population in the different regions of the state. So MAPC is projected to grow 9% in population from 2020 to 2050. And that growth is shared among our neighboring Eastern Massachusetts regional RPAs, regional planning agencies, as well as the Worcester area. However, we see decline in Western Mass, the Montechusett region, the Cape and Islands, and the South Coast out to 2050. Zooming into the MAPC region, these charts have a lot going on, but I want to point out some detailed trends in the population here in the region. The blue lines on both of these charts represent our decennial data population that we know, and then the orange bars represent our forecasted population. So this first sort of, maybe I'll use my laser pointer here. This first circle, I just wanted to point out, this is that rapid growth from 2010 to 2020, about 10% population growth in MAPC over that one decade. And then we see over the next 3 decades, overall about a 10% growth, 9% growth. So we're still growing, but it is slowing down in these forecasts. This chart shows population by age group. So these are our 0 to 9-year-olds. These are 80 and over year olds. And what we can see here in the children under the age of 20, little to no growth in the next 30 years. In our 20 to 29-year-olds, we see a big decline in population from 2020 to 2050. And that represents the aging of the millennial generation. So that group will decline in the coming years. And then on the flip side, we see a huge increase in our populations over the age of 70. And this is the continued aging of our baby boomer generation. We actually see a growth of more than 250,000 residents ages 70 and older in the next 3 decades. Looking at households now, this chart is showing household change by age group or age of householder. Overall, we're expected to see about 12% household growth from 2020 to 2050 in MAPC. And sort of based on those population and demographic trends, what you can see is very little growth in our households headed by somebody ages 35 or younger. And then sort of much more growth from 2020 to 2050 in our householders ages 65 and older. So those householders over 65 account for 2/3 of net household growth in the next 3 decades. We then looked at our household trends by household type. So whether the household is a single person household, 2 or more adults with no children, or households with children. And continuing with the trends we've already seen, you can see a large increase in the households of somebody living by themselves. A lot of this is driven by older households living by themselves. Continued growth of 2 adults with no children, and then still growth, but slower growth of households with children. The colors on this graph represent incomes. So the blue, dark blue and light blue represent our lower income households, those making under $35,000 and $35,000 to $75,000. And overall, 63% of net growth is among households making under $75,000 per year. Again, a lot of this is growth in single person households living on a fixed income, those older households who are moving into retirement years. And the growth in households with children is more on the higher income scale. This is driven by growth in households with children with parents 35 and older with 1 or 2 children. So finally, we've on the housing side of things, we've translated that household growth into housing unit demand. And we have projected that we need in the MAPC region 232,000 new housing units by 2050. And the way we've come to that number is to take our net new households, 168,000 new households, then add a factor for the need to achieve a more healthy vacancy rate in our housing stock. So currently our vacancy rate is fairly low, and we want it to come up to more like 4 or 5% vacancy to sort of moderate prices, make stock available for looking for folks needing a new home. And then the third component that we've added is accounting for latent demand. So I mentioned that our household formation rate has been really suppressed in the last decade or two. That's those roommate households that would like to split out but can't because they can't afford it. That's individuals living with their parents because they can't afford to get their own place, and so on. So we've assumed that once we are able to add new units, get to that more healthy vacancy rate, that will start to moderate the pricing in the region, and then more folks will make those decisions to form new households. 2 last points on the housing unit demand. First, nearly half of these 232,000 new units are actually needed 2020 to 2030. So we need more sooner, and then the need sort of ramps down in the subsequent decades. So that's really important to keep in mind, that we need to be building households, new housing units over the next decade at a faster pace. And then secondly, these numbers don't account for that sort of international migration trend downward. So if we are at the federal scale able to sort of get back to more stabilized international immigration, we will certainly likely need more units to accommodate that demand. On the job side of things, the MAPC region is projected to continue to gain jobs, about 185,000 new jobs over the next 3 decades for about 10% growth. Our fastest growing sectors are information, education and health services, professional and business services. And then the biggest declines we see are in leisure and hospitality, manufacturing, and construction. Spatially, we see a lot of this job growth concentrated in the inner core. And the reason behind this is driven by 2 things. One of the inputs into our model is the pipeline, the development pipeline that we collect in our mass builds platform, which municipalities contribute to. And so a lot of the projected pipeline in sort of job development is in the inner core. And then secondly, our fastest growing sectors of information, education and health, and professional services are already concentrated in the inner core. So just to recap some of the important trends, statewide populations and households will see slow growth, but continued growth overall, 2020 to 2050, while some regions of the state are projected to decline. MAPC is projected to grow in population, households, and jobs over the next 3 decades. And most of our net household growth is among lower income, older adults living alone. We project a demand of about 232,000 new units by 2050, with almost half of that needed by 2030. And we really are thinking of that as a floor. And then, of course, sort of the availability and pricing of our housing stock is a critical factor behind all of these trends. All of the data behind these projections are available on our website at this URL. And I would be happy, I don't know if there's time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jessie. Certainly insightful information and will be useful in many of our future decisions. Are there any questions or comments for Jessie? Vandana?
Thank you for that great presentation. I just wanted to let you and other folks here know that we use these projections that have been put out by MAPC, by UMass Donahue and others to develop water needs forecasts for communities that come to DEP for their permits. And so there is a methodology that the Water Resources Commission has developed and approved that I use to develop these forecasts of water needs. And many times communities go to DEP asking for X volume of water in the anticipation or thinking that they're going to grow a lot. And usually the case is that they're not really anticipated to grow to the extent that they initially think they would, because, you know, projections just like this are showing a different trend. And so we use that to think through what kind of need they may have on the water side. So it's really helpful to have this thoughtful sort of process of looking at this data by demographic, by, you know, by age, et cetera, to kind of bolster what this overall trend and projection would be. Jessie, I'm wondering if, I don't know if you've connected with our staff at DCR that do the projections. If not, I would really welcome an interaction between our staff that do these types of forecasts on water and use your information for it to sort of engage with you and understand some of this process that you've just outlined in the project.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would be happy to meet with them. I haven't personally. It's probable that my former colleague Tim had met with them, but yes, I would be happy to share and connect with them.
Okay, terrific. I'll make sure I connect the two of you. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Jared?
Jared?
Yes, hi. Thank you for that excellent presentation. Do we know I mean, I know the numbers changing all the time, and I know that some of this is going to rely on sort of what the final plans that cities and towns have to submit for 3A. But are we starting to get a rough guesstimate of how many units 3A is likely to end up zoning for, and sort of what is the delta between that and this, particularly when we talk about the need for more of that housing by the end of this decade? And then I've got a slight follow-up after that, but.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. It's important to note that these are sort of status quo projections. They don't yet include any assumptions about 3A. We will be doing sort of alternative scenarios using our understanding of districts, of 3A districts, and how that might impact the trends in these household patterns. I don't think we have an estimate of the net new units for 3A. That's my understanding, but I would welcome one of my colleagues to chime in. Maybe Mark, you know better than I.
Well, remember, I mean, Jared said how many units will be zoned for. I do think we can figure that out. I don't know that we have, but I think we can figure that out because the communities will have a certain capacity number that they need to reach. That is an extraordinarily different question from how many will actually get built and when,
right.
Which is not very dependent upon zoning, but extremely dependent upon interest rates and other factors.
Yes.
So that's where those differ. I think there is a question about what this means for the overall housing need in the Commonwealth. However, the previous administration and now the current administration have tended to bandy around this number. 200, we need 200,000 more units. And it's a statewide number. It doesn't usually come with a start date or an end date, which means it's a little bit meaningless. It's a good line, but we don't really know what it means. And I have always felt that that's probably a little short. And if we have 232,000 in the MAPC region by 2050, half of which is required by 2030, which is only 6 years from now, I assume the number wide is considerably higher.
Yeah.
Jared, I know you had a follow-up, but just to address that, Mark, I have a little bit of inside knowledge with Tim, my former colleague, being at HLC right now, and they are planning to use these projections to formulate their sort of new demand number. So they'll be based on these projections. I don't know if they're planning to do a big rollout of a new number, but I've heard from Tim that they are. He is using these in his sort of calculations of what is needed for policy.
In high places,
right?
That is great news. Yeah. So then I guess my follow up is, are there plans to sort of look at what that number looks like for sort of each of the communities, sort of based on sort of size and proximity to to jobs and transportation nodes, or even sort of what transportation nodes we might need. I recently went to Toronto, and I think it's very interesting to sort of think about some of our peer cities, whether it's Toronto, where they've chosen to preserve the single family homes, but then on arterials, even 15, 20 miles out, you've got 40, 50 story buildings, or whether you're talking about something like Chicago, where it's more of a, sort of moderate, sort of density further out, but certainly 5 or 6 miles out, you're still talking about, 10 story buildings, where in Boston, you start to get 5 or 6 miles out, and we're talking about, town centers, very single family, maybe with a couple of 70s era, 5 to 10 story buildings. But I think that's something that's been weighing on my mind. It's just the appreciating the political sensitivities of how we message what this growth is going to look like, but having that butt up against the hard, cold realities of, we're not going to 5 over 1 ourselves on arterial roads and keep single family neighborhoods entirely intact in cities that are 4 miles from Kendall Square and solve this solve this crisis, this need, whatever we want to call it. But so I'm sorry, that might be more of a somewhat of a comment, but also that question of just what are we going to sort of do with visualizing this and sort of talking about the trade-offs and getting really granular.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. So we do have all of the population and household trends down to the municipal scale. That's all available on our website at the link that I shared. I don't believe we've published yet the housing unit demand at the municipal scale, but that's something we will do and have up there eventually.
Along with the methodology of sort of like how they got
exactly
see people.
Yeah. And I think it is important, this will be clear in our methodology, but these are status quo projections. So they don't include sort of what the future could look like under 3A or with sort of more robust sort of housing policy. And those, again, as I mentioned, we're hoping to do some scenario development to forecast what could be if we made different decisions.
Thanks, Jesse.
Awesome. I'd love to be engaged with that.
Thank you, Jared, as well. And I just want to make quick note of the time. We do have a couple of agenda items left and 6 minutes left in this meeting, as well as a vote on the consent agenda, just as a reminder to everybody. And with that said, I will go to Mo.
Thank you. Just a quick question and a comment. Do we know what the current MAPC housing deficit is as of today? And secondly, how do we incent the utilities to meet the electrical demand, both of new housing units, but also the increasing electrification of our utility demand as it swings away more from gas and oil?
That's a great question. I don't know the deficit off the top of my head. I mean, it's a moving target, really, because these projections are not meant to be sort of set in stone. That's why we update them every 4 years. But we do know that we've been severely underproducing compared to what is needed by about, 40% or so. In some ways, we've estimated it. So, that need for increasing our vacancy rate sort of reflects that underproduction, because we've really squeezed the stock that we do have as much as we can, and we need to give it a little bit of relief. So I don't have a concrete number for you, but I would say we know that we've been underproducing. I would love if somebody else could help with
Lizzie is on the grid modernization committee. So as I said in the chat, we have assigned that problem to her and she will solve it. I think we ought to give her a month or two. It's probably that is a longer conversation than we can have today, Mo, but I know that Lizzie would be glad to discuss it with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mark and Lizzie and Jesse. Are there any other questions for Jesse? Okay, seeing none. Jesse, thank you again. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you all. Take care.
Next item on our agenda is preparation for the October 25th Fall Council meeting.
So I will be quick because I know time is short here. The meeting is virtual on Zoom. It is October 25th, not October 26th. You should all have the information. We are getting registrations back. I am always really sweating the quorum at these meetings. But I hope we can pull it off. So please join us on the 25th. Bring your friends and relatives and anyone else who looks a little bit like a MAPC council member. There is no keynote speaker. We are still working on whether or not there will be a presentation. We are going to be making 2 awards at this meeting. And so this is hot off the press information. The awardees, no, that's not true. One awardee has been informed. The other one has not been informed. So I'm going to ask you to please keep that in mind. We are creating a new award this year for excellence in community engagement. And we are, to sort of explain what we mean by excellence in community engagement, we are making the first award to the Director of Community Engagement for the Attorney General, Emily Torres Cullinane, who, as you all know, established the Community Engagement Program at MAPC. We are not naming the award for her because the executive director of MAPC thought that sounded a little too much like in memoriam. So we're just calling it Excellence in Community Engagement. We are thrilled to make that presentation to Emily. And Lizzie, she knows, correct? Yes, okay.
She's aware, and she's, I think, starting to nervously write some comments.
Okay. The Mann Award, Mayor Teddy Mann Award for Regional Leadership. We've currently gone through the process that we normally go through, which is to let the family know about the awardee first and to make sure that they're on board. In my 20 years here, they have always been on board, so that's not really a difficulty. So I am expecting that that award will be made to the Director of Planning at the Town of Randolph, Michelle Tyler, who has done a tremendous amount of work with MAPC departments in public health, in arts and culture, in land use and other areas, but also has always played a big role in approaching and addressing regional issues. So hopefully, if I get a thumbs up from the family, the Mann family today, my happiest call of the day will be to call Michelle and let her know about this award. I would like her not to know about it before I speak with her. So I need your cooperation on that, okay? Unless she's tuned in on the YouTube, of course, but not many people do, so. Lizzie, am I missing anything on the council meeting?
No, you got it all.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then the next item, the next executive committee meeting looks like it's scheduled November 15th, 2023, and that will be an in-person meeting at the MAPC offices.
Yes.
Anything to add there, Mark?
No, please put it in your calendar now and do that thing that none of us ever have to do anymore, which is actually put travel time to your schedule. So.
Thank you.
The committee wanted to meet quarterly in person, and we did that in June, but it was a little difficult to do it over the summer months. So we are doing it in November, and that will be an in-person meeting. Look forward to seeing all of you.
Thank you.
In Boston, is that right? In Boston?
In Boston at MAPC. It's going to be our first meeting in the third floor conference room for the executive committee of this organization in almost 4 years. And we will have, I was going to say, we will have the usual sumptuous repast, but we might make it a little more sumptuous than usual in celebration of our getting together again.
Okay, thank you. We're looking forward to that. Is there other business not known at the time of the posting of this agenda?
Not for me.
Okay, great. So our last item for today would be to vote on the consent agenda items, which were approval of the minutes from September 2023, as well as the treasurer's report and the financial statement for July 2023. I believe, Mark, if you could just help me out with this, we don't need another motion. We can just call the roll
No, it's
at this
fine.
point.
And Ellen, I think, is available to call the roll.
Okay,
Would
Ellen,
we-
if
But before you do, I have a question.
Would we also include the motion to adjourn?
Yes, we should do that.
thank you. Is there a motion? Can I consider that?
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
How do I abstain on one vote and approve another one? I was not at the last council meeting, so I cannot vote on the meeting minutes.
John, there is no rule at MAPC that you can't vote on the meeting minutes. If you trust the staff and secretary to compose reasonable meeting minutes, you can vote yes.
Okay.
And that would save a lot of time for all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Keith, was that a motion to include motion to adjourn on the consent agenda?
Yes, I move that adjournment be included in the consent vote.
Thank you. And seconded by Mo. Okay, thank you. Ellen, if you could call the roll for one final time today, I'd appreciate it.
Yes. Colette.
Aye.
Keith Bergman.
Aye and goodbye.
Karen Canfield,
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Let's see, Tom Daniel, if you're still here. John DePriest,
Aye.
Tom Galligani,
Aye.
Mo,
Aye.
Shagun,
Aye.
Jared,
Aye.
Tabor,
Aye.
Angie,
Aye.
Steve Olenoff,
Aye.
Vandana left us, Claire Ricker,
Yes.
Sam Seidel,
Aye.
Steve Silvera, gone, and Elaine Vanya.
Aye.
Great, we are, that passes, we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.